Hey guys, this is Paulo with Meditation Amsterdam, and I wanted to do a follow-up video to a little clip that I created earlier today about reincarnation, or the idea of reincarnation within the Buddhist philosophy. And the reason is that I was left with a number of afterthoughts following that video. The video was mostly explaining how Buddhists explain the idea of reincarnation, how it came about, and uh, some of the considerations to keep in mind when you are evaluating that idea, which stands outside of the normal paradigm that we have of a scientific and materialistic view of the world, or a mechanistic view of the world, if you will. It is also kind of a mechanical explanation, but it speaks of mechanics on a larger, more sort of pattern line like scale of things. But there was a thought that came to mind after the clip, which is in this explanation of reincarnation. I was going on about how it is that in your essence you are this kind of package of information and memory that is conscious and that keeps finding ways to express itself, and in order to do so it embodies or incarnates into a human body and then starts to play out these repetitive patterns over and over again within a lifetime, but then also across lifetimes. And one of the things that occurred to me is I also mentioned how the entire Buddhist practice of meditation, mindfulness, observances, and also what you could call the more monastic or the more austerity-like practices are geared towards ending the cycle, what they call the cycle of samsara, the cycle of confusion and reincarnation. And so from that you can conclude that so far as you are confused about what you really are, you really have no choice but to continuously reincarnate and keep playing the same patterns out over and over again. Now, so what is interesting is that so long as you don't understand this, you are in essence condemned to enter the cycle of samsaric suffering of life. And that the moment you start to understand it and step out of your identity as your personal individual identity, then you stand a chance of stepping out of that cycle. From that perspective, when you start to understand this, but also when you, not intellectually, but when you start to embody this understanding and really realize what it means, it starts to become very clear that your spiritual development is the only real development you can speak of. This is not to say that there is no such thing as personal development. In previous clips, I've made a distinction between personal development and self-development and self-realization, right? So self-development is all about, improve how I think, improve the things I know, improve how I can execute them, improve my view of life, if you will. And self-realization is all about stepping above all that to a meta level and realizing what your true essence is, okay? And so, of course, there is a place for self-development. And in fact, you could even make an argument that it is very difficult to self-realize unless your self-development is stable and good enough. Yeah, because otherwise all you're doing is spiritually bypassing the fact that your life is in shambles, and you don't want to go in that route. It makes things, unless you are very strong in mind and very already self-realized on some level, having your life in shambles is only going to undermine your spiritual development. There comes a tipping point where your mind is strong enough and your degree of self-realization is strong enough so that your life being in shambles is actually used as a vehicle to even propel you further into your spiritual development, but not before that. If you do it before that, and if you start to put up with things that don't feel okay to you, So long as something doesn't feel okay to you, it means that you're not above it yet. And therefore you either improve it or you get above it, or both, right? Ideally you would do both. So, but so if we go back to this whole idea, it is then to say that the only real game in town is a spiritual game. That every other game that you're playing in your life to improve the content of your life, to improve your, what you call your life, is a game that inevitably ends in your death by definition, right? Because everything you do to improve your life comes to an end the moment you die. But it has another longer term consequence if you subscribe or entertain, if you will, the Buddhist notions, and that is that improving your life and improving yourself only reinforces your concept of your individual self. It becomes a golden cage, you could say, and it simply makes it so that by the time you die, if we consider this whole reincarnation idea, you have died with an even more entrenched image of yourself as a limited person that has problems and patterns, or that has overcome problems and patterns, and therefore is very cool, which is yet another identification, except that when you were born, you were identified as a crappy human being, and by the time you die, you identify like an amazing human being that overcame all these kind of things, but the pattern of identification remains the same, and therefore you reincarnate yet again, because while on the level of your human identity, you maxed out or you improved dramatically on who you were, on the level of spirituality, you remained as flat as a pancake, right? There was zero improvement because you never made the jump, you never made the meta jump to say, oh, that is great, but really what I am fundamentally is awareness, and therefore I observe myself improving here and there and doing all these kind of things, but I know that is a play taking place, and I have worked on realizing myself on a spiritual level, for lack of a better word. And so from the perspective of the Buddhists and the true yogis, not people just doing asana practice and bending themselves into a pretzel, but real yoga, is it's the spiritual development is the only real improvement to speak of, because everything else is you confusing yourself with a human that is, suffering and improving and doing all these kind of things, but you never acquire the higher spiritual perspective of the game that is really at hand. Yeah, so you're playing the wrong game essentially. I love the movie The Matrix, because it really provides the perfect analogy for this. Is to say, before Neo in the Matrix gets pulled out of the Matrix and understands what's really happening, everything that he's doing within the Matrix, no matter how well he does it, amounts to nothing, because it's all a fake reality. So you could compare it to a dream again, right? Typical analogy. So suppose that you're dreaming, and in that dream you are a kid that faces all these obstacles and whatever, and then within that dream you overcome those obstacles, you become this amazing person, and you build all this kind of stuff, and then you've maxed out on just how good you've tackled things in the dream, and then you're very proud of that. First of all, the moment you wake up, everything it just goes up and it's gone, right? And that is akin to death. It just came to an end. It meant absolutely nothing. But it's also to indicate that no matter how well you did it, you were not aware that you were playing the wrong game, even within the context of the dream. Whereas if your awareness is strong enough and you within a dream find yourself improving or doing all kinds of things, but you are awoken to the fact that you are dreaming, you can still go through those motions. You can still improve the content of your dream. You can still improve the way in which you go about in that dream, and the experience that you create for yourself in that dream. all of the while knowing that it is a dream that will come to an end by the time you wake up. And by doing so, you have created an awareness level that is going to benefit you once the dream comes to an end, because that cultivation of awareness has no end. So therefore, you've risen to a level and you are playing a game that benefits you outside of the context of that dream that will come to an end. So then the question is, what happened? So suppose that we subscribe to the idea of reincarnation and of life being like a dream, and of the fact that you only want to ultimately improve on a level that carries you forward across lifetimes, if you will, or that puts an end to the cycle of samsara. Well, that's all great, but I would then have two questions that would pop to my mind. One of them is, should you do it at the expense of improving the content of your life? And the second question is, what if you're wrong about all this, right? Like, what if you deprive yourself of all kinds of cool things in life for the sake of living like a monk mode type of life, in which you are sacrificing all kinds of pleasures and going for austerities in terms of the food you consume or the entertainment that you consume, because you're trying to reach these higher levels that in the end just come to an end anyway when you die. Like, and then it was all for nothing, right? And so I'll tell you where I stand on it today, based on my level of understanding and based on my level of development, and also based on what I read of people who are on a higher level. And so, and that is that to me, it's still worthwhile. So first of all, down to the first question is, so should you do it at the expense of living a good life? And what I've started to understand is that that's what in debating or logic terms you would call a false dichotomy, because you are saying if you want to develop spiritually, you have to sacrifice the pleasures in life and the good stuff, or you have to sacrifice personal development for the sake of or personal or self-development for the sake of self-realization, that those two things are opposed to one another. I think that if you understand what self-realization is, you would come to very quickly realize that no real self-development can happen unless there's some level of self-realization also accompanying it. Now, that's not to say that some technical things or certain understanding of things cannot improve. I think that you can get to a high level of self-improvement in the terms of, you being a technocrat, if you will, who can really do certain things very well. I think that in the physical realm, for example, you could be a spectacular athlete that is totally clueless to self-realization. So on the physical level, that might be true. I think that on the mental level, that is also true to the degree that we're talking about thinking and logic and hard mental skills. I think the moment you start to go into the areas of what we call soft skills, they demand that you start to become much more attuned to yourself and others, and therefore self-realization starts to kind of go up kind of by default. But nothing that you could claim purely spiritual is just almost by necessity. So there's almost like there's a continuum in terms of what you can improve without or with self-realization. Physical stuff you could just do and improve massively without any self-realization taking place. Mental development you could do around certain areas, like I said, and then when you get into soft skills, self-realization starts to play a stronger role, and less you are blind to what you're trying to do. And then there comes a point where self-realization becomes a must, or even becomes the driving force to the type of self-improvement that you are doing, and then the whole thing flips into self-realization, and self-improvement starts to become a byproduct of self-improvement. So it's kind of, you could see it as a continuum in that way. They're not necessarily opposed to one another. And what is interesting is that the higher parts of the scale, the ones in which self-realization is driving or significant, can very easily affect the lower parts of the scale, so that when you are self-realized, the kind of physical work that you are doing becomes enhanced on a completely different level. That would be, for example, a discipline like Tai Chi Chuan, right? In which case, at first is very physical, but when your self-realization is higher, it is said that the consciousness moves the body. It starts the other way around, but when it becomes higher, it's the consciousness that is doing the real action, so to speak, right? So the higher the self-realization, the lower spheres that you're working on in self-improvement starts to become much more informed and much more powerful. And then the second question is, but what if it's all bullshit, right? Like, so what if you don't reincarnate and you gave many things up, or you were simply confused and you were chasing unicorns and rainbows and things that don't really exist? And I would say that, funny enough, the pursuit of spiritual practices and observances during your life have a very tangible and positive effect nonetheless, right? So the net outcome of doing that, even within a single lifetime, without having to subscribe to reincarnation, is very significant and very positive. So that the argument for saying, I'm just not going to bother with any of this stuff is pretty weak, right? It's almost like you see it even in military contexts, or the contexts of diet and health, for example. So from a military context, it's very clear for people who follow these very disciplined approach to life that it is a far more rewarding way to live. So there's a book from this ex-Navy SEAL guy called Jocko Willink, and the name of the book is Discipline Equals Freedom. And I might be doing some videos on that. But it's clear to this guy that if you follow an approach that is very stoic and very based on discipline, that you feel ironically more free than people who live this loosey-goosey life in which everything is just sort of floppy and not very structured. And you also see it from a health perspective, in which if you deprive yourself from constant pleasure, you start to shift away from these little dopamine hits that you're giving yourself all the time towards a more serotonin-driven life, and you're just happier, right? And that's to say that then there is something to be said about monk mode, and about serotonin, dopamine fasting, and about living with some degree of austerity, so that life just feels better in general, because your brain is, as a matter of fact, healthier. So even if there's no reincarnation to speak of, there's still some very strong arguments behind why you would follow the precepts of a spiritual life, and so that hopefully there's still a very strong incentive to do that. And guess what? If you turn out to be right, and that whole dynamic of reincarnation is actually true, then you've accumulated a lot of merit, and it propels you across a longer span of time to wake up and to stop eventually that samsaric cycle of rebirth that keeps going on and on, unless you adopt those practices and make that effort that leads to self-realization and enlightenment, or Buddhahood, or whatever we want to call it. So those were my afterthoughts from the previous video. I hope that sheds a little bit of more light into the whole subject, and I'll be back for more content pretty soon. Cheers.